Welcome to Baltic World. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
It's our week in review. Baltic World is a channel where we discuss important issues facing Northern, Central, and Eastern Europe. But before we begin, how are you, Crispin?
Busy.
Busy?
Yes. Generally good, but having to move soon.
Yes.
Had a lot of life stuff going on, so that's all wrapping up now, so I can focus on packing and getting rid of everything. I'm very much a minimalist when I travel, though. So in a sense, in terms of moving, it's not so hard to pack everything up because I don't own a lot.
So when we say moving, does that mean the space is going to change?
It is going to change. So what I will do, the lighting that we have, which is like the biggest, heaviest things, will go to Charlene's house until we get a more permanent space. I'll be in temporary accommodation until we go overseas because it'll only be like 6 to 7 weeks between now and then. So I don't really want to sign a whole new lease and settle in and then just fly overseas, because it means that this way I can do it cheaper. I don't have to pay accommodation while I'm away. So what I'll do is I'll get temporary accommodation, which means that we'll have a temporary setup. Now, we've become pretty good at sort of innovation in terms of how we do our filming and things. We've got drones, we've got different types of lighting and setups. So we will still make it look decent. Who knows, maybe even better. But it will not be the normal studio. So we will be out of this space, and future videos will not have this background. And there are other actual creators that have kind of backdrops that clearly they can film wherever and it doesn't matter. They just put up the same backdrop.
True.
We'll see. We're kind of developing in that space. But yes, we will be out of this in a week or two. And in the new world.
Yeah. Okay, so busy. So what, poker games going up?
Well, poker's been kind of dead because we have all these restrictions. I mean, I'm playing poker, obviously, but we have these restrictions where people have to show all kinds of check in, show their vax status and things like that. And so the big venues like the casinos, well, they don't have nearly as many people as they normally do. So the games are obviously less productive, less good. It's mostly just the dedicated regulars going. So I am enjoying it, but it's much quieter than it was previously. But looking forward to that turning around. I've noticed that in those countries where the restrictions have eased, particularly in the United States, live poker has come back with a massive boom. So we're seeing all new poker rooms open up. I'm seeing things in Texas and Louisiana and Florida and Nevada. So hopefully that'll happen here as well. So poker's definitely not dead. It's not something that's going to go away permanently. Not like, cinema, for example, which I think has undertaken a structural shift as everyone moves to streaming services. Yeah. Poker, I think, will come back, hopefully.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's kind of awkward, right? Even ordering a coffee. I was like, okay, cool. So, I need to check in. Yeah, here's my check-in. And I need the certificate. Okay, here's it. And and also here's my loyalty card because I come here all the time. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, okay, I'm about to go and you have to pay. Oh yeah. It's just like a behavioral shift that I'm just not used to.
It's a terrible time for hospitality staff, having to do all of that extra work. Plus the fact that the people don't want to come through the door in the first place because they know they're going to be subjected to all of that. And the fact that people are working from home. So people who are doing the daily coffees, a lot of these coffee shops obviously are near offices and things like that where people are coming out during their lunch breaks and things or before work. They're really struggling.
If I enter the cast, I'd also have to show my ID too. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's crazy.
Because I'm definitely going to be ID'd. But yeah, no, that's insane.
What about you? Anything new?
My ceiling is being fixed. So previous week in reviews, I think I showed footage of my house and my ceiling collapse. Look, people, check your ceilings because sometimes the glue grade, if builders are trying to cut corners and kind of thing, wear over time. But yes, insurance came through, so I have ceilings and electricians in and again fancy lights. So yeah, I'm happy with that. So that's just the win for the week. And apart from work, that's about it.
It's also a very hot summer, even by Australian standards. We've been smashing records. I think where we're at, we've had more days over a certain temperature than ever in history, and we're only at the start of February. So that accounts for, January, February, and then like December as well when the next year summer hits. So yeah, it's a very hot time to be in Australia. Real struggle outside. If you are in Australia, remember to protect yourself in terms of skincare. We just had Australia Day as well with a lot of fireworks. That was fun. I managed to go out on a boat, which was nice and cool. And we saw the fireworks out on a boat near the barges. Now, when you're really close to fireworks, never knew this, but when you're really close,
loud?
It's not just loud, but there's a shockwave, right?
Oh.
And you don't feel it when you're far enough away. You watch it from a distance, and it's just you see the noise, you see the thing, and then you hear it when the sound reaches you, but you don't feel anything. But when you're really close to it, that you do feel a wave of airburst that hits you because you're close enough that it is a proper explosion.
I just remembered. Yes. And it's Chinese New Year as we're filming this, right? It's the year of the tiger.
Yes. Happy Year of Tiger.
Yes. Happy New Year. So I got to have my red packet and eat lots of food. It was great. Yeah. It's weird though, like not to be able to go back to Malaysia to see my family during Chinese New Year. Because it's meant to be like a reunion, celebration, much like Christmas, but
I've noticed they've stopped calling it Chinese New Year.
Are you serious?
In the press. Yeah, they call it the Lunar New Year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they don't want it to be called Chinese New Year anymore.
What's wrong with that, huh?
Well, I don't know, because I've just seen it in the, also when I can understand it in certain contexts. So, for example, I saw in the press that the Lithuanian rum that got exported to Taiwan had sold out within an hour. Like 10,000 bottles just gone like that.
So it must be good, guys.
Well, I read the reviews as well. And some of the Taiwanese, it's funny, the Taiwanese all give it 5 stars, right?
Yeah.
But when you read the reviews, they're like, it's a very harsh taste. You got to mix it. Like it's kind of like it's okay, but it's not like, clearly they're like it's drinkable, but it's not like amazing.
Yeah.
They're buying it obviously out of loyalty. But all the articles that I saw on it were like, oh, it's for the Lunar New Year. They wanted to buy it up quick so they could celebrate.
Oh, okay.
And they obviously using the term lunar rather than Chinese.
Right. I'm not that precious on names, to be honest. I mean, it means the same thing. So I guess also non-Chinese people celebrate during this time too. So I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still China. I would call it Chinese New Year because the story behind it, how the animals get on the zodiac. It's a very Chinese story. It involves the Jade Emperor, the races across China. So yeah, it's a bit odd, but I can see for political reasons that they've taken it off. And also, I think to legitimize Taiwan a bit more. Call it the Taiwanese New Year.
It doesn't have the same ring. Okay, cool. All right. And okay, so this week, oh my gosh, things are going down in Ukraine. Like, it's inevitable. What I've just seen in the media, it seems that they're just sending more troops over, or what is happening? Like, are we expected that there's going to be an invasion in the next couple of weeks? Like, let me know.
I think so, but I mean, as everybody says in the press, the only person who knows for sure is Vladimir Putin. But they're really selling it at this point. There was a joint communique with Putin and Xi over in China, because that's where obviously the Winter Olympics are. Putin went to visit. And that joint communique is very long, and it goes into NATO, it goes into American foreign policy. It's very clear that China is supporting Russia in its position when it comes to Ukraine. There's a continued build-up along the border. I think thousands more troops have been going into Belarus in particular, which is really interesting because obviously that's technically a sovereign country, and so there's a massive military build-up in Belarus.
Yeah.
And you were doing everything you would do to prepare for an invasion. And
is Ukraine prepared?
No. I don't. I mean, they're getting support from allies or partners. They're aware that this is happening, but I think the government is in a bit of denial. They don't necessarily see an invasion as imminent. They think that America is over-egging this a bit, that ultimately Russia is fellow Orthodox Slavs and that Russia wouldn't do this to them, kind of thing.
So they're building up all these military for fun on the border.
Yeah, and the weird thing is they've already got their response. So let's say they were putting pressure on NATO and Ukraine, and they were doing it purely as a bluff and as a negotiating tactic. Well, that bluff has already been called. America has rejected the core proposals of the Russian Federation. NATO has shown a higher degree of solidarity than Russia could have expected. So if Russia was going to back down, they could have already done so, or at least not further escalated. But they're at the point now where it's looking very much like Russia is poised to invade. And they will find some pretext. And the timing, put it this way, if it doesn't happen within the next 5 to 6 weeks, it won't happen. Okay, this is very much a short window now because the Russians will want to invade when it's still very frozen and cold, allowing their tanks, APCs, artillery pieces to travel the flat ground in Ukraine with relative ease. But once things melt, once things thaw, turns to mud, once the rivers kind of start flowing properly again, that becomes a lot harder. And by that stage, of course, Ukraine's defenses will have sufficiently improved as well because you've got all these missiles going into Ukraine from the UK, from the Baltic countries, and the 5,000 helmets from Germany that everyone's laughing at.
My big question is, like, why now? Like, why is Russia going to, like, why is there evidence of Russia being invading Ukraine now or not, like, why wasn't last year or like next year?
Well, we can only speculate. I would say there are several reasons, though. One, Putin is getting to the end of his term, really. Like, although he can be president for as long as he likes, he's sort of into his 70s. He's now going to be thinking about legacy. What does he want to achieve for Russia before he moves on? That's number one. Number two, the Biden presidency. You have to remember Russia went into Crimea in 2014 when Obama was president and Biden was vice president. There is a general feeling that Democrats don't resist Russian expansionism particularly much. That the foreign policy establishment is much more multilateral and America sort of apologist rather than America kind of greatness. And so just generally Biden's age, his the failure when it came to pull out of Afghanistan, I think had an impact on Russia as well. Even though the withdrawal from Afghanistan was strategically correct, tactically it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And the rise of China, the need for America to be focused on the Asia Pacific, that now has a lot of currency in the United States, and America's tiredness with foreign adventures abroad. There doesn't seem to be any appetite in the American electorate to go and die for Ukraine. So there's a lot of advantages of doing it now. And also just because China is at that point where they will be pushing hard in Taiwan and the South China Sea. America knows that it can't afford to get distracted in Ukraine. And thus, all of these sort of stars align that this could be a really good time for Russia to do it. And then also finally, just specifically right now, it's a very cold European winter. There's a high dependency on Russian gas. The inflation, which we will talk about, is extremely high. Like it's gone up hugely, the cost of gas and oil this year. And thus there'll be a deep reluctance of putting in punishing sanctions on Russia because there's a high degree of dependence on Russian goods. So there's a lot of reasons why Putin would choose right now. It's not a bad time to do it by any stretch. I think just the longevity of his lifespan is going to be a major factor, though. Yeah,
given all those factors, it sounds like they have a high degree of success then.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that might... There's a couple of things that could pause them as well. The sheer cost of a military operation of this size is huge. And whether Russia can sustain high-intensity military operations for any length of time is a real open question. Can the Russian economy support such an enterprise, given how weak the Russian economy is right now? And then, if Ukraine puts up a serious resistance, determined resistance, is the amount of troops that Russia has, even though it continues to build up, sufficient? One thing that has been observed, though, is the number of Russian troops that have been pulled off the border with China. This is by far and away the weakest border that Russia has had with China for 50 years. So they fought a border war, Russia and China, in 1969. It was kind of a skirmish. Russia comprehensively won that. That was back when the Soviet Union was at the height of its power, and China was a backwater, a basket case under the Cultural Revolution. So Russia was way more powerful than China at that time. Now the situation is totally inverted. China is vastly more powerful than Russia, particularly along this border.
Yeah.
So there's a very high degree of trust that Russia has here, that Russia and China are working kind of hand in glove, that we had that joint communique that I mentioned before. So Russia feels sufficiently secure in its partnership with China that it can afford to pull massive divisions off the long border that they have. 150 million Chinese are across the border. It's like, in a territory where in the Russian Far East is fewer than 6 million people total. So we're talking real risk that Russia runs there, but such is their degree of confidence in their partnership with China that nothing could possibly happen, that they are willing to pull those troops away and focus in Europe. And China is likely to do the same, except in Asia.
Do we expect then China to be supporting Russia with military gear? Personnel, or not really? I think they're more focused on Taiwan. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't think they're going to supply any personnel. What they will do is support the Russian economy in the face of sanctions.
Right.
So America will put all these sanctions down, Europe will put all these sanctions down, and China will make a concerted effort to buy Russian-like products. So gas, oil, any other kind of military exports, that sort of thing, to keep the Russian economy going, and also provide a foreign exchange, because there'll be sanctions on the Russian ruble, attempt to disconnect them from the SWIFT payment system. The Chinese will extend kind of credits in yuan to allow the purchasing of various things in their own currency to get around sanctions. So China will help mitigate the sanctions imposed upon Russia's economy and provide goods where they're necessary, but certainly not troops. They'll focus on the Asia Pacific.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And then you mentioned, and we'll circle back, is inflation. What's happening in the Baltic with inflation?
Okay, so inflation in the Baltic region is the highest in Europe. So you've seen that video I put out on inflation and what's happening there. There are two main drivers. One is worldwide, and the other is specific to that region. The worldwide inflation driver is energy. In Europe, it's gone up 28.6% year on year, an insane increase. And the thing about energy is it has flow-on effects throughout the entire economy because everything relies upon it. So in terms of transportation, you have freight costs. So if you're getting your tomatoes that you've grown to market, well, that costs extra money in gasoline, and that flows on to the end price for the consumer. If you are an office and you're providing services, or you're a hairdresser and you need like your electricity for your clippers and everything, well, those energy costs have increased, therefore you have to flow on that price to the consumer. So there are so many input costs that come from energy that go across the entire breadth of the economy. And a real problem for the Baltic countries in particular is that the higher proportion of the cost is borne by the lowest income earners. The inflation is incredibly regressive. If you're, and remember, these countries have older populations where these people don't necessarily have high incomes. They live in rural areas. They depend on the everyday consumer goods. So fresh fruit and food has gone up by over 5% this year. That's on top of course, the energy costs as well. So all of these things snowball and get out of control.
So, but why is because we're using more and there's not enough?
Well, yes, demand side. There is both a demand side problem and a supply side problem. The demand side problem is that we're in a very cold European winter. People are working from home. Therefore, all the houses that were normally just freezing during the day while people were in their offices, well, they're all burning gas at a higher rate. So the demand for gas and energy has increased, as well as the supply challenges where there was a massive drop in oil prices in particular during the pandemic. You'll remember the
they had storage of oil, right? And they couldn't move it.
yeah, they were literally paying people to take excess oil. It never happened before in history, and now the total inverse has happened because the demand for oil has increased way more than people expected. People have wanted to travel. We're not seeing it in all parts of the world, but certainly in Europe, massive increase in tourism and flights and everything way faster than people expected, and production hasn't kept up with that demand. Also, after the experience of the collapsing oil prices, the oil producers are reluctant to increase production rapidly. They're worried that it's too volatile, and therefore they want to do things really gradually. So in that meantime, there is a gap between the demand and supply, because demand is increasing rapidly, but supply is only increasing slowly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the geopolitical concerns, as we mentioned about Russia and Ukraine. Russia produces around 10 million barrels of oil per day, not to mention the gas. If they go into Ukraine, then all the sanctions will cripple that even further. And then plus the demand. If you have a massive war machine rushing through Ukraine, well, a lot of Russia's domestic oil production will go towards its own military support. And thus, there is a real concern that oil will increase well over $100 a barrel. Meanwhile, gas will have all these sanctions, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany. There'll be no gas flowing through that if they invade Ukraine. And there is a serious concern about supply, but also because of the...
Is there ways to mitigate that?
Well, the Middle East countries could increase production.
Okay.
And they could probably do so with greater confidence if there was a conflict, because they would know that the demand is still there, but the supply has been curtailed. But still, it'll be a significant jump in prices. No, there'll be a serious oil shock. There isn't that many opportunities for gas when it comes to the Baltic countries. Of course, the dependence on Russian gas is well known. This is serious. But this is also worldwide, and in a sense, that's not specific to the Baltic countries.
So what is specific to the Baltic?
Real estate. Real estate. So they've gone through a massive housing boom in the past few years. And the reasons are really interesting, because it doesn't make intuitive sense. Because these populations are declining. Normally what you do is you say, okay, there's this massive demand problem as people are immigrating to a country, the population is increasing dramatically, but the construction industry hasn't kept up, therefore driving up prices, right? More demand, less supply, increasing price. Whereas the populations of these countries has continued to decline, and yet Vilnius and Tallinn in particular have had massive booms in their housing costs. So a house in Vilnius now is 12.2% more this year than the same time last year. That's a huge increase in price. And the reasons are interesting, and I've seen speculation and analysis, which I had talked about in the video.
Are people starting to discover Lithuania?
Partly yes, because what's happening is those super massive metropolises where inner city living is prohibitively expensive, Sydney, London, San Francisco, New York, where you buy an apartment for just millions and millions and millions of dollars.
And you live in a shoebox.
Yeah. The only reason people were doing that was to be close to their work. People didn't want to commute long distances. And if they had a high-paying job in an inner-city area, they were often willing to pay stupid rents to live close by. But then with the pandemic, people were encouraged to work from home. So if you were working from home, working remotely, it made no sense to pay stupid amounts to live close to your workplace because you weren't going to your workplace.
True.
So people were going to the more suburban areas. Now, in the major cities that I just mentioned, like New York, there was a significant drop in housing prices. But at the same time, in the second-tier cities, there are Seattle, St. Louis, Sacramento, they had a property boom. And as we dig into it, it seems like people who are young professionals who are earning decent salaries, they're the types of people that can work remotely, work from home, because they're tech savvy, they're working in IT and industries like that, and they're encouraged to work remotely. Well, they actually want to have an urban lifestyle. They want to live in an area that has all the amenities close by, but they choose urban living for the lifestyle choices, not because it's close to work. There's a different motivation. And because the inner city and New York and Manhattan, places like that, are just insane, Well, they can go to the smaller cities that are still cities and pay dramatically less relative to their incomes. And so if you're in Sweden, for example, right now, where the average income is something like $5,000 a month, something really, really high, a bit less than that, but still really high, then moving to a place like the Baltic states where property is way cheaper than that, still doing the work remotely, why wouldn't you do that? So that's increased demand in the inner cities of the capital cities, particularly Tallinn and Vilnius, where internet speeds are super high. There's no problem working remotely at all, but the actual property prices is way more affordable relative to Stockholm.
Yeah.
But their incomes are way higher. The problem and drawback is it's pricing locals out of the market because the debt to income ratios of these properties is ballooned. So for example, right now in Vilnius, it's about 13 years average local salary for an average apartment, let's say. It's about 8 years in Kaunas, so it's less expensive.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of like that FIRE strategy. So being financially independent and retire early strategy, where they say like what you do is you get a high paying job, work really hard, and then you move somewhere where cost of living is low.
Yes.
And then when that happens on scale though, not just individual, on scale, I can see the problem would arise.
Yeah, it's dramatic as well. And the problem...
So wouldn't they just tax everybody? Like I would. If I was like, all right, if you're an immigrant, well, you're being taxed.
Yes, but we shouldn't say that because I think there is a exposure risk here, even for the people that are doing this. And there's a couple of reasons. One, we don't know whether this distance working will be tolerated long term, whether people will start to be like, okay, no, there are benefits to working together in an office. And I do think that there are benefits to working together in an office. But then there's a more immediate challenge. First of all, inflation is continuing to increase in the other sectors of the economy. So let's say you've just taken out a massive mortgage to live in inner city Tallinn, okay?
Yeah.
But the cost of living is going up everywhere. Well, you're already paying a huge amount in mortgage repayments, and you're having to pay more for everyday goods. Yeah. So you have to hope that your wages can continue to keep up. If not, then that's going to really eat into your ability to survive. And then as the property market overheats, as inflation goes crazy across the economy, what governments will seek to do is to slow down things down, and they'll increase interest rates. That's the main mechanism they have to reduce spending. And once you reduce spending, you hit inflation. But if you've got a huge mortgage, significant inflation across the economy, and the government then increase your interest repayments, that could push you over the edge. It could certainly lead to a housing crash, because if you've got a declining population, as you still do in these countries, then there is the underlying fundamental demand. And if people start selling up because it's no longer making economic sense, they want to move somewhere even cheaper, then what you could have is a massive bubble in these urban areas. If you've got these kind of digital nomads who are the ones driving it, well, anything that happens to that sector, which inevitably must happen at some point, is going to disproportionately impact the property markets in these areas.
So how do we get out of this situation?
Well, there is a view that the property markets in Tallinn and Vilnius are starting to slow down, that they've basically hit the top of the thing.
Run out of houses.
Latvia still has a ways to go. It's believed that they're still kind of hitting their boom now.
Yeah.
I think a planned construction could be good, like just really working out how much property you need to build and calibrating that effectively, making sure it doesn't get out of whack, and attracting young people who are expats and emigres from those native countries to come home. Because it's one thing to have people from really wealthy places like Sweden to come and just go across the Baltic Sea to live cheaply in Vilnius. What you really want is to attract those people that have left Lithuania to come back. And the reason for that is they'll have families who will grow up in that country. If you're someone who's like from Sweden living cheaply in Vilnius, well, you might have a family, but it's quite likely you'll go back home where you've got all the social services of the welfare state that exists in Sweden.
Whereas if you have a family here, like you're locally from Lithuania or Estonia or Latvia, like the economy stays within their country.
Exactly, and you've got your ties within the country, and so raising a family within the country, and then you can kind of build population more naturally.
Sure.
There is a big question about that, but it does seem like policy has kind of run away from the politicians here. It is a massive boom in an environment of significant inflation, and I'm really worried about the rural areas where there's a two-tiered kind of thing. If you're not in the digital space, if you're not an IT professional, if you're not working remotely, then you're really reliant on local industry, and these cost of living pressures are intolerable for you. Particularly if you're an older person who's already peaked in terms of their earnings potential, if you haven't paid everything off, things are a real stress. If you're in the rental market, it could be really difficult. So
would the government just have to take on more debt? Can it?
Well, it is actually. There is a payment scheme. I think if you're a single parent in, I think it's Latvia, it's now an extra €50 a month in benefit. These kinds of like basically welfare benefits that are being increased to mitigate the effects of the inflation. But of course, that also drives inflation because you increase consumer spending. Yeah. So it's a tough time for the Baltic countries economically, and I hope that it changes. I think if there's a dramatic increase in oil production and the oil price falls, that could be a big benefit. Certainly if the heat's taken out of the housing market. And if the interest rates rise, what that'll do is reduce borrowing. So people will stop buying as many properties, and that will put a downward pressure on the price. But I'm worried about those people that are already overexposed because they've got huge mortgages, increased cost of living. And if they find that their property starts to decline, that could create a real crisis.
Yeah. Okay. So it's more like watch this space and see what happens.
Yeah. And also the people that are being currently left behind, the older people who just can't afford to keep up with the cost of living, people on low incomes, that's going to be tough for them as well. So we'll see what happens from a cultural point of view, societal point of view, because I don't think this kind of cost increase is sustainable.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, cool. So I've got some comments.
Oh, yeah. So just on that, before we lead into the comments, one thing I've noticed in the analytics of our channel is just the level of engagement relative to views. So
when we look, the best fans.
Yes, we do. Now they've taken off the dislike button, so it's really annoying to see, different channels and compare yourself with different channels. But when I look at most successful channels, it's like 10% likes relative to the views, and then maybe 2 or 3% comments. Whereas our comments and likes are so much higher as a percentage of total views. The only thing lacking in our channel is the views. So thank you so much for the high level of engagement. Remember, if you're enjoying this content, do like, subscribe, and leave a comment because it really helps. And it's just so amazing because it means that YouTube's like, oh, we've got to flog this channel to more people because it's got a really high level of engagement. It means that people really enjoy it. And that's helping grow the channel really quickly. So thanks for doing that. But anyway, yes, comments.
Let's get into them. Comments. Yes. I know. And a Fennec, a guy from Poland, is one of those people.
Yes, keep doing it. I love it.
It makes me smile all the time. Okay, so we've got a few comments here. Anton Wersgilt says there's been reports that Russian troops have re-entered into Ukraine countryside. So they think that 2 weeks tops. Otherwise, it's time to pull back. But
certainly. Well, first, there's several points there. First of all, of course, Russia has already invaded Ukraine. It's occupied Crimea. It is engaged in Donbass. However, there's also beyond that highly likely to be Russian operatives in the east of Ukraine identifying people who are likely to be pro-Russian sympathizers who will take up the armed struggle. And what will happen is they'll ship in weapons and equipment secretly to these areas so that when Russia invades, they'll be able to start an uprising locally. So we're looking at like Spetsnaz, special forces operatives, leading uprisings of local Russian speakers who want to be part of Russia so that as the Russian military advances, there's already resistance within the city against any defense. So that will really help the Russian attack. And thus, it is highly probable that there are Russian operatives already active in Ukraine ahead of any formal military advance.
Yeah.
So it's a good point. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, no, here's a good point. Change gears. We've also got a comment here from Mr. Luba. Thanks for comment. I really like it, so I might just break it down. It's quite a long comment. Considering Netflix The Witcher, so this is about the Witcher video that we did, and then your interaction with Lauren.
Yep.
Who is the show? Is that what called showrunner?
The showrunner for the Netflix Witcher series.
Yes, the showrunner. So it is considering Netflix The Witcher. It is truly a waste opportunity. The more I think about it, I don't think it will ever reach its potential. Interesting. The ideology above anything else approach of the showrunner and the writing team will most likely continue to drag the show down until it's cancelled, which we have seen in other series before. Yeah. As a huge fan of the source material and as someone who has a background in marketing, Netflix has revealed their hand. The marketing was heavily focused on Henry Cavill, and at every turn they proclaimed their love and respect to the books and also the games as well. Only for season 2 to reveal that this was not the case. It can barely be called an adaptation. Ironically, the forced diversity is just a symptom of a far deeper problem. The writing is poor and the spirit of the books has been thrown out the window. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, I don't know, I remember seeing the trailer for The Witcher and I'm like, oh, it's Henry Cavill. And then like they do the whole fighting scenes and yeah, but that wasn't really portrayed in season 2. He was like, thinking. It goes on. The numbers for the second season are also lower than season 1. The audience reviews and overall fan feedback to season 2 has been mediocre at best and negative at worst. Will this be a wake-up call for Netflix, and will the series do a massive course correction? I do not know. In a business sense, it should be clear as day that Lauren isn't the right person to run this show, but the ideology runs deep. It might just turn out that nothing changes, and Lauren will continue to give us her vision of what Witcher should be. Season 3 is about to start production. That will be the season that determines the fate of the show. Will the fans be there? Will Henry Cavill stay on board? Because if he walks, the show is done.
That's a very well thought out, well articulated comment. So thank you very much for that. There is a subversion of IP that's occurring across Hollywood, and we see this from a number of stories. So certainly one of the great He-Man issues right now, where you had all this advertising about He-Man and reviving He-Man and throwback to the 80s and all the themes of He-Man and so forth. And Kevin Smith was running it, and people like Kevin Smith because he was the Clerks guy, the Dogma guy, the Chasing Amy guy. So they thought, okay, he's going to do things faithfully. So people had a lot of trust and faith, and all the messaging out there was like, yes, this is going to be reclaiming the feeling of old. And then as soon as it's released, it's focused on Teela, and Teela doesn't even look like a woman. It looks like someone who's... people did a shot of Teela with her head shaved, and it was like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was really quite something. So what we're seeing, and the same is true for The Witcher, what we have is a lot of advertising around Henry Cavill, who people like, the game, which people absolutely obsess over, and the faithfulness to the Slavic source material, which inspires people's wonder and imagination. And the first season almost stuck the landing. I didn't have a problem with the chronological issues because I thought that was creative, and I always give creativity a bit of a pass.
Yeah, and it made sense because when you read the book, that's exactly what it did.
That's true. And it nailed certain things. So, for example, there's a lot of sex in the first season, like a hell of a lot of sex in the first season. And people are like, oh, there's too much sex. No, like in the books, there's a lot of sex, and in the game, there's a lot of sex. So it was just reflective. It was a faithful adaptation. But in the second season, there is literally none whatsoever. And we're getting this sort of bait and switch where you get drawn in and they point to the things that are faithful to what they advertise. So lots of Henry Cavill, lots of things, throwbacks from the source material, and an interesting montage of the different short stories that you see in The Last Wish, the first Witcher book. And then in the second season, you get the vision that the showrunner has, which takes it in a completely different direction. And you get a lot of ideology, removal of all the kind of Slavic themes, heavily Americanized, heavily made about Hollywood, the modern intersectional politics that you see in Hollywood right now. And that's where I think Lauren has taken the show.
It's gonna be really
exploiting
hard.
the IP.
It's really hard to even have the season 3 in order to. I don't even know what course correction might even look like, man. Like, because you have the main characters in a certain way being portrayed, like, you know, injecting their ideology in all these random parts. Like, how the hell are you meant to work with that? Yeah, and then suddenly having to, I guess, fleshing out the characters more, and it would just be really weird. Like, I don't know.
Okay, so there's two different questions there. Can it course correct?
Yeah.
And will it course correct? Can it? I think it can. I don't think that the problems are yet fatal with the show.
Right.
They do have the core elements of what they need to get it to work. Such as, you know, Henry Cavill is just amazing as The Witcher. Season 3 will probably have a bigger budget because, yes, the commenter is correct. There is a reduced viewing in season 2, but still in the top 10 Netflix series of all time, easily. So it's huge following, and the characters are generally good. Like, people like Ciri, Yennefer. There's some problems with the character, but it's not bad. Jaskier is wildly underutilized, but generally likable. So you've got the core elements there to make something work. And if it went in a mature direction and focused on the Slavic themes, then it could be really something. Season 3 could change it all around if you had a dramatic change behind the camera. And that's where the problem lies. You know, Lauren is still the showrunner. She's really excited. They're kicking off all the filming right now. It's pretty clear from my discussions with her and what I've put out there that she's not going to change course. She has her ideologies. She's going to stick with it. She believes she's doing the right thing, regardless of the pushback.
But what if the money goes down?
Well, then it could be cancelled. Then we could cancel. But it's not going to be...
It's like Game of Thrones.
Yeah. And I don't think it can go through another full season and then course correct as easily. The further down this path you go, because the problem is you introduce in the first couple of seasons what you're setting up.
Sure.
Okay. And what they've set up is Ciri is the center of everything, and everyone's fighting over her because there's potential new conjunction and the wild hunt with the undead kind of creatures running around. Yeah, that's all possibly like really interesting. Some of the individual characters need a dramatic refresh. So we talked about Yennefer last time, how in the first season it's like she wants a child and she's given up so much for a child, but she's gained so much as well in terms of magical power. She loses magical power in season 2. All she seems to care about is magical power and
nothing about a child.
Nothing about a child. And so you could do that in a much better way.
Yeah, and it could be cool to see in season 3, like Jaskier and Geralt like rekindle their friendship a bit more, because it seems like he was just left behind.
It's like, he was a waste in season 2.
Yeah, he was, and he was like, and he brings like, you know, that lightheartedness and the songs. Like, I think we need another hit.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not going to get to that mature Slavic mythology that you get in the books and that you get in the video games, because those are essential. I mean, what you really want is hard-hitting, like, things that make you really uncomfortable, that confront your Western liberal kind of perspective on things and adopt a more Slavic, medieval ethos. What you want is to be sold on the possibility that a Slavic medieval mentality has a point about something that affects you in your current life. But what we're seeing instead is an injection of Hollywood politics into this that's saturating the entire feel and visuals and the story and the dialogue and the underlying messaging of what would otherwise be a very interesting and unique IP. And so the absolute washing over of the Slavic element is a disaster, and I think that's what's going to cost it its popularity long term. So as far as the commenter goes, I agree with every single one of your points, and I think it's not too late, but it is too late in a sense that they've already decided.
True. It's kind of interesting, you know, like the movement from having, you know, big blockbuster like on the in going to the cinema, you know, and then having upcoming platforms like Netflix, streaming services. Like I would have thought that, you know, this problem of ideology wouldn't be so much a problem. Like people be more open to having controversial ideas and being more, because I would have thought there'd be like more independent movies. Let's say, yeah.
One would hope, yeah.
But it doesn't seem to go that way. I think that's because the economy is moving to streaming, so therefore big Hollywood is moving to streaming. But what were you saying before about Netflix losing money?
Yeah, well, actually, so this was off screen. I can leave you with this one bit of hope. Netflix stocks have plummeted in recent weeks. They've lost a lot of market capital. Their numbers of subscribers has been really disappointing. They've been jacking up the prices to try and compensate. It's costing them more subscribers. There are more and more streaming services coming out there. And so the fierce competition for viewers is going to play into it now more and more. Netflix won't just be able to coast on the fact that it's a monopoly and force feed people their ideology. They're going to have to take some account for the shareholder and their share price. So that means if people are unhappy with The Witcher and they don't like the direction it's going in, and they're willing to walk with their wallets and provide the feedback and say, look, we're not interested in this show. It doesn't seem to be following the source material. Well, the executives will get that message, and ultimately they'll either accommodate the fans or they go in a different direction and lose more and more subscribers. Now, the problem with that, there is a drawback, is that what fans say they want is not what they actually want, okay? And we see that with Star Wars. So when everyone hated The Last Jedi, just despised it for going against everything Star Wars is and was, they gave it back to J.J. Abrams to do the final movie. And then you try to appease everybody. Even Chewbacca got a medal because in the first ever Star Wars film, like Han and Luke get a medal, but Chewbacca doesn't get one. And that was like a joke that people had over the decades. And so they're like, oh, we better give Chewbacca a medal. There's every single bit of little fan service you could possibly have in that one movie. And it turns into a terrible movie. What viewers want is rich, powerful storytelling. Nobody in Game of Thrones wanted Robb Stark to die with his wife and everything else, like in his mother, in the Red Wedding. But that Red Wedding scene is still the best scene in the history of television, full stop, right? So people want stories that make sense with characters that they care about, where the story arcs and character development is follows the source material, and that source material is rich and worthwhile itself. So if Netflix, recognizing that they're hemorrhaging, and they are hemorrhaging, they course correct with actual good writers and stories, then maybe The Witcher could turn around. But I'm not confident that that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Good. I'm glad that, you know, I mean, money speaks. So, and also, Facebook's share price down too. So, yeah. I think people are also commenting of just, you know, these big companies, the cost of censorship. I think people are becoming fed up.
They are fed up.
And they're just going to move on to something else with, their attention elsewhere. So,
yeah. And now there are actually options, which is the big thing.
Yeah.
But speaking of mythology, this book has arrived, which a few of you...
What's that ugly book?
recommend. Of Gods and Men, Studies in Lithuanian Mythology. And when you see the book online, because the cover looks kind of cheesy and cheap, right? When you see it online, I was like, wow, it's a very expensive book for what looks like a pamphlet. But actually, this book is very well made. It's like a proper hardcover book. Excellent quality pages and print. It's a very well constructed book, just as a product. But what's in there is incredibly dense. Now, the viewers out there did warn me of that. They said, look, this is a very difficult book to read, and it is by a semiotics expert in linguistics.
Yeah. I try to read it, right? I just focus, I look at the book, and I read the first line. I'm like, a lot of syllables in this sentence.
Yes, there's a lot of etymology of the words and proving that they're actually Lithuanian, and the various comparators, studies of various linguistics and thinkers and so forth.
So
it's an academic text.
It is academic text. It's someone's thesis is plonked inside. And so what we're saying is Kristen's going to read it, digest it, and then tell us what it's about.
But that's the thing. So this book is totally inaccessible by the lay reader. Like no one who's just interested in Lithuanian myths and legends will pick up this book and be satisfied because it's a very academic text. Now, as an academic text, it is superb. Like they really make their case from a linguistic point of view, transliterating an oral tradition into proving that these things come from pagan Lithuanian myths. And it's an area of research that is grossly understudied. So this is a very valuable academic text. But the value for me comes in the actual myths and legends themselves. And as you go through it, you can begin to understand what the myths and legends are. And what I think needs to happen is to take this and translate it essentially again into a book of myths and legends with lots of pictures, and maybe make it a children's book because there are so many cool things in here. So just to take one example, if you watch the Harry Potter series, the kind of house elf Dobby, well, there's a Lithuanian origin for this kind of creature. It's sort of called a Kaukas, Kaukas. They're a domesticated version of another creature that lives in the forest, and there's like a contract that you sign. You give them a flax garment. They then provide an abundance of a particular good. The contracts are really strict though, so if you ever break them, it becomes a disaster for all the parties. So and that's just the first creature that I've come across in this book. And I think that you can create a whole mythology around this that comes to life, particularly knowing the Lithuanian landscape as I do and how you would actually develop these myths. This particular creature worships one of the Lithuanian gods. The pantheon of Lithuanian gods is being developed in this book as well. So thank you so much for this book. What I will do is give a full review in one of our review series. I'll give it to Charlene.
Yeah, I'll have to read it too.
It is extremely difficult to read. So I can't recommend at this stage just for the lay reader to buy it because I found it to be quite expensive. And unless you're like interested in linguistics, if you are interested in linguistics, definitely it's very good for you. But if that's not why you're interested, if you're interested in just the myths and legends, then perhaps wait for our review because we will pull all those things out. And then, maybe even translate for a different book, have an illustrative book that tells the stories of the Lithuanian myths and legends. I think that would be really valuable because the myths and legends themselves are fantastic, absolutely great. It creates a whole new Tolkien-esque world just out of this this one book, and it being quintessentially Baltic. So that's really going to be great, and I'm looking forward to that. But the book itself is, it's a dense read. It's really, really impenetrable. So
it's kind of amazing because, like, Christmas is the type of person, obviously, that reads widely, right? And so him to say this is a difficult book, it says a lot.
Yeah, it's a particular sub-branch of linguistics, which is like a forensic linguistics, semiotics, where you try and prove the origins of particular stories and myths from oral traditions based on their linguistic characteristics. So there's a lot of linguistic science in this book because the purpose of
dumb it down for me. Linguistics being like
the study of languages, the study of words and languages. Yeah.
So in terms of like the way the word is constructed and like parts of a word.
Yeah, so all languages have rules and grammar and various, we might have like male, female words. And like linguistics is the study of language itself, okay? So obviously if you're a good linguist, you'll probably speak multiple languages, but that's not the study of the language. It's the study of language. And
how it's constructed. And because like the Lithuanian language was obviously verbally passed down, that's how...
It's a very important science because Lithuania, in particular, is the oldest language in Europe, right? Predates Latin for thousands of years. It's a very old, archaic language. You're really throwing back when you speak Lithuanian. And Lithuania, of course, was the last country in Europe to be Christianized, so it held on to its pagan traditions. But one of the drawbacks of that, I mean, it's a fantastic thing from a history point of view, and we talk about that in our series. But one of the drawbacks is it's not a literary tradition. You've got the Latin script. They're teaching the Bible. You've got all the clerics who are recording everything, all the births and deaths and taxations and so forth. You don't have that same literary text in the pagan lands. Everything is oral tradition, stories passed down. So when you learn the language and you then understand the rules of the language, then you hear the words, things that are coming from the region, other areas, and you do kind of a forensic analysis of the origins of certain terms and words. You can basically deduce where certain stories come from. What is Lithuanian versus what has Lithuanian adapted from another area? So let's say you've got a god in Denmark. Is it, which came first, the Lithuanian god or the Danish god?
Right.
Well, semiotics can help unpack some of that. What elements of the god are Lithuanian, what elements are Danish, and so forth. So this is a study in that to kind of create a actual text that covers Lithuanian myths and legends. What are Lithuanian myths and legends? And the author does this in a very scientific way. So very grateful as a work of linguistics and semiotics. My interest is in the pagan myths and legends and the mythology of pagan Lithuania. And I think what we can do is from this text is digest what's being said, the different creatures, the different myths, the different stories, transliterate that out into layman's terms, put in a lot of pictures, and then that can be a book that every person can pick up and read.
And then we'll reference this book as source material for those who really want to understand.
Exactly. If they want to know why we know it's Lithuanian, this book is really solid on that point. So,
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we've got for today. So any questions, any feedback, please leave them down below. Like Kristen said, like and subscribe, leave a comment if you haven't already. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao for now.